good. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Madi. I am the Hospitality and Events Coordinator at Stoke. It's nice to meet you. So today we have Dr. Erin Friess speaking. And so a little bit about her. She's an associate professor for technical communication at UNT. She received her PhD in rhetoric and her master's in professional writing from Carnegie Mellon. Her current interests include user-centered design, workplace communication, and usability and user experience testing. So today she'll be showing us how usability testing can help improve that user experience for your products and services. But before we get started, I would like to just do a quick round of introductions. So just, introduce yourself, maybe if there's a specific reason you're attending today or some knowledge that you're looking for. So whoever wants to go first, go ahead. But that way Erin can kind of get a feel for the audience and what your needs are. Who'd like
I'll jump in.
Thank you, Lacey.
You know me, but I don't think anyone else does aside from Erin. I am Stoke's Marketing and Member Coordinator, so I'm here on Stoke's behalf, but also hearing about usability, user experience, usability testing. I think will just help with what we do here. So listening in, multitasking. Yeah, and I believe, Billy, you are a new Stoke member, right? A virtual Stoke member. Cool, awesome. Glad to see you online. Welcome.
Welcome. All right, Billy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, can y'all hear me okay? My mic is on the fritz. Awesome. Yeah, so I'm new. My name's Billy. I campaign for a living. And so this interested me because I definitely want to get back to a research background. And I feel like campaigning is just the same thing, just with a little bit more intent to get certain results. So I'm really excited to hear all about it.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I can imagine this is going to be some good content for you. Kathy, would you like to go next? I'm not sure if you're here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm
awesome.
here. Can you hear me?
Hi.
I am a former technical writer and was always interested in usability because our software was used by, well, and still is used by major cell phone providers. And usability is important because many of the actions they take are at risk of bringing entire networks down. So usability is critical to the software design stages.
Definitely. Awesome, thank you. And then Jen, would you like to finish up?
Sure. Hi, my name's Jen Beckett. I'm a senior product manager at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. And so I'm really interested in usability testing or user testing around the industry that I'm focused in for my personas and customers today, which is more back-end stuff. But so there's no like GUI. So I'm really trying to figure out ways to do not really UX testing or UI testing, but more just around usability from the perspective of, as a product manager, thinking like Horizon 2, Horizon 3 initiatives and validation with our users, and just really focusing on problems and then solutions that are hypotheses that are validated through like usability testing kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And then we have one more person join us. Razvan, we're just kind of doing quick introductions. So just introduce yourself and maybe why you're attending today if you're looking to learn any specific thing. I think you're muted right now. There you go. Can you hear me? It's okay. We'll go ahead and get started. So Erin, I'll spotlight your video. Alrighty. The floor is yours.
All right. Okay. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and listening to what y'all are saying, what I'm going to talk about may or may not be exactly what you are looking for, but I'll be happy to answer questions later. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to review usability very briefly. A couple weeks ago, I gave a talk on what usability is and why we care about it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 techniques about how we can assess various things. I'm going to be talking specifically about websites just so that we have a common ground to talk to, but a lot of this can be extrapolated to some other realms. There's technique 1 is user testing, and the technique 2 is expert evaluation. And then I'm going to do a little recap. So as Mari said, I'm Dr. Erin Friess, Associate Professor of Technical Communication. I got my MA and PhD from Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, so I am a Steelers fan. Sorry, we have 6. What is usability? And so my definition of usability is, can intended users use an artifact to successfully accomplish a specific task? And that's all, to me, usability is. Can someone do what they want to do with whatever the thing is? Is it an app? Is it a website? Is it a tool? Can they do what they want to do? So, for example, this is a website for Skip Lagged. If somebody came to this site, would they be able to do what they want to do on this site? And that's what I consider to be finding out about usability. Okay, so good usability is that users can use your site and do what they want. And if something's bad, then they can't use your site, or they don't like it, or they leave to go somewhere else. Okay, so we don't want that. We don't want people to leave to go somewhere else. We want people to do what they need to do where they are. And so the first technique that we can do is user testing. Now, this is considered the gold standard of usability assessment. The ideal is that it takes place in a lab setting, that there's going to be 2 computers and 3 people. One person's going to be a participant, one's a facilitator, one's a scribe, and that you have to test 5 people to find 80% of the problems on a site. And that is great, but that is hard. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and it just a lot of resources to be able to do that. So what I'm going to talk about are sort of discount methods that we can do that get us in the same ballpark without having to invest $10,000 in software and having to have all of these computers and recruiting people. So what should we do? If you want to know more about this, Steve Krug has an outstanding book called Rocket Surgery Made Easy. It is he writes all of his books so that they can be read on a plane ride, which, you know, planes were things that used to fly in the air when we would actually travel to go places. So all of his books are very accessible. How often should you test? One morning a month is the expectation, is that if you can dedicate 1 morning a month to look at your site and assess the usability of it, that's all you need to do. And that you want, how many people should you test? Ideally 2 people. Like I said before, if you want to find 80% of the things that are wrong on the site, you're going to need to test 5. But 2 people will find about 50% of the problems on a site. So that's a pretty good estimate there. The worst number to test, I know that y'all are all muted, so I won't make everyone say what, but the worst number to test is 0 people. When you test 0 people, you find out nothing. So even if you can only find 1 person to test, that person is outstanding. So who do you test? Ideally, you want to test people who you think use your site or you would want to use your site. But Steve Krug tells us that we should recruit loosely and grade on a curve. So whenever I have to create a website for my class, I often try to get a student who is a UNT student, not in my class, to go through it and to figure out where problems are, where things are causing them to have problems. But you know what? Sometimes I'm really late and I don't do my work when I'm supposed to. And so it's 2 days before classes start and I don't have any students that I can easily access. So I ask my husband. And I make my husband do a usability test for me to see, he is now fairly familiar with the learning management system at UNT, so he's fairly decent. He knows nothing about, he's a software engineer, and yet he knows nothing about usability and user experience. So he's a pretty good person for me to test. In a lot of ways, he's a lot like my students. And in a few years, I will be recruiting my daughter to then do some usability testing for me on my sites when I need them to launch. So you don't need to, a lot of people get hung up in finding the perfect people, the perfect person, or the perfect set of people, population to recruit from. You don't need to worry about that. Do the best you can and know that you might have to make some modifications based on who that person is. So what you want to do is when you finally bring someone in, you want to tell your users that the site is being tested, not you. And that's a big deal because people often get a little nervous that they are the ones being tested, but it's not. It's the site that's being tested. You want to tell them to do their best without using a search function or the back button. And you want to ask them to say what you are thinking aloud as you go through the site. Now, that is tricky, and that's the hallmark of user testing. It's called a think aloud protocol. That's the part of the user testing that's really valuable, is this think aloud protocol. And it's really not that easy to do. So if you think about going to like the site I showed you before, you might say, okay, well, if I was the person being tested, I would say, okay, this looks like a website that is associated with travel in some way. And what we're trying to do is listen to what the person is saying so that we know, what are they noticing first? What are they noticing second? Why are certain things being ignored? Okay, and it's pretty hard for people to do this, but there have been studies that show that with fMRIs that show that think aloud protocols engage the proper areas of the brain related to task completion that is not just speech related. So what that means is that we have a pretty good idea that what people are doing does in fact represent what they are thinking. So what you want to do before you get started is to get people talking. So I tend to ask some softball questions like, what's your favorite website? How often do you get on the web? Which was a better question like 10 years ago, because everybody's on the internet all the time. What social media do you use? You also want to talk to them about their job, their education, how often they go to particular sites like this. It's really important just to get people talking, okay? And the very first tasks that you want them to do, always, regardless of whatever it is, if it's a web page, you're going to do a homepage assessment. If it's a app, you're going to do the app open page. If you're going to do a tool, it's just going to be whatever the tool, the task, the document, whatever it is. But on a website, what you want to say is, look at this homepage. Scroll as much as you want, but don't click on anything. Tell me what you see and what do you think this company does? And that is really important because you might be surprised at how many times people get it wrong about what a company does based on what they present of themselves on the homepage. And that often happens because people that create content are often internal to the organization and have a very clear understanding about what that company does. But people that are external and are coming to that site might not have the same insider information, the same internal structuring. So it's very illustrative to be able to ask people, what do you think this company does? Because sometimes people are just way off. And like one of the first iterations of the Postmates site, people looked at the name and looked at the information on there and didn't quite realize that it was like a food delivery system. They thought it was a letter delivery system that was meant to take the place of the postal service. So because they both had the word post in it. So so ask people what they think the company does and what their impressions of the site are. Then you want to ask them to do a couple more things. Generally, you want to have 3 to 5 tasks in addition. That includes the homepage scroll. But what you want to ask them are finding some pain points within that website. So are people writing you? Are you getting information from people that are confused about some things fairly often? That might be a task you want to ask your users about. Or are your analytics showing that people are leaving at a certain point? If there's a process to go through, if it's an e-commerce site, are they leaving things in their cart and then leaving the site? That might be a pain point. There might be something there. So that might be a task that you want to ask people about, okay? the way the task might look is you might say to someone, you're thinking about taking a trip to New York over Thanksgiving this year. What would be the cheapest way to get to New York for a 3-day stay? Or you want to take your family to Orlando for Christmas, but you are concerned about losing money if you decide to cancel the trip. What kind of travel insurance can you purchase to alleviate your financial concern? So those are things that you can, you want to give people enough information to be able to make a decision, but you don't want to handhold them through the process. So if on that first site, Skip Lagged, if we gave them that site and said and asked them about making a trip to New York, what you want to do is see where are they looking, what are they clicking on, what are they paying attention to, how are they making that decision to get to New York. And if there's anything that they do that is unexpected or any problems that run up, then that's an opportunity for you to say, oh, that could be something that I need to change on this site. Okay. So again, we want to give them enough information of what they want to look for. We don't want to tell them exactly what to type in. You always want to start on the home page, and you don't want to answer questions from the participants if you can help it. So if they're asking you things like, where should I be clicking? You don't want to answer that directly. What you can say instead are things like, what are you looking for? Tell me what you were thinking. Is that what you expected to happen? Or what are you trying to do now, to try to prompt them into giving more information? And Steve Krug calls this things that a therapist might say. Okay, so these are things that you say to help to get people to keep talking. Okay, so at the very end, you can ask any follow-ups. They can be general follow-up questions, just about anything, or they can be specific to the particular task that you asked. And when you are done, you want to be able to look at your data and say, okay, what is the low-hanging fruit? Are there broken links? Are there typos? Are there bad logo links? Those types of things can be fixed really quickly. And those have a high payoff rate because then you can see it immediately. But then you might want to be able to identify some of the higher fruit that was going to take a little bit more work on the site. So navigation errors, that's one of the biggest problems with websites is navigation problems where people click and it takes them where they don't think that they are going to go. Reliance on the search bar is another issue that we often see, and what we call back buttoning, which is where people, instead of using the website to navigate, will use the browser back button to back their way back to a place where they feel familiar. So if people are using the back button a lot, then that might mean that the overall construction of a site might need to be reevaluated. Okay, and then when you test the next month, when you have your 2 hours, you want to identify, you could ask the same tasks, you could modify the tasks based on what you did. You might want to say, what's better? What's getting worse? What do you want to add to your higher fruit list? Or Jen, I think you told me you were a product manager, like what gets added to the product backlog, right? And what will be pulled up later. So that's great. Like I said, usability testing in that sense with the Think Aloud protocol is generally considered the gold standard. And that when people really, really, really want to find out what's a problem with a site, they will do usability testing. And for those of you who were here for my talk 2 or 3 weeks ago, all of the examples I gave about the dishwasher and about the $300 million button, those were all identified through usability testing and Think Aloud protocols. So if you weren't here, I think Mari made a video of it and you can go see it and see where doing those types of tasks can actually yield some very big real world responses and results. But if you can't do that, there's also this thing called expert evaluation or expert review. Because we can't always bring in people to test. We just can't. And we don't always have the resources to be able to test people. So we instead use heuristics. And heuristics is just a fancy word for guidelines, really. And expert evaluation uses heuristics to determine how well a website adheres to principles of usability. So in this instance, there are principles of usability that other people have identified. And what we get to do is to go through websites and say, okay, how is this working with these studied and researched heuristics. So I want to warn you that some people say that this type of testing isn't actually usability testing because you are not testing actual users. You're just looking at it yourself with the idea of what a user might do. And I say tough because we sometimes just don't have the resources to be able to do the ideal thing. We have to make do with what we got. So there's lots of different heuristics out there. I would say just put heuristic evaluation into your favorite search engine. Mine is DuckDuckGo. And then you look for web, mobile, look for apps, VR, whatever you want to do, you can find a heuristic evaluation tool that is best for you. Whoops, I went the wrong way. There are some big picture concepts associated with heuristic evaluation. Like one of them is visibility of system status. So for example, we've all been to a website and it gives us the indicator that the website is loading or that something is happening. Generally, if something is happening, you want to tell your users that something is happening. Users get frustrated and grouchy when they think the website has frozen. Okay, so that's one thing that we can do. We also want to make sure that there's a match between the system and the real world. So both of these are 502 bad gateway errors, but the one that we get from Google is a little bit more helpful for someone who is not familiar with what a 502 bad gateway might be. It uses real language that we use. The server encountered a temporary error and could not complete your request. And then it tells us what to do. Please try again in 30 seconds. Okay, that's a better match between what is going on the website and our real world abilities to talk about it. Error prevention is another thing that we want to try to do. I know this is a little hard to see, but when you are sending an email and you forget to set the attachment, your email client will say, it looks like you meant to attach a file. Did you mean to attach a file and then you didn't? And that is a means of error prevention, okay? Some other big picture concepts are you want to have clear and helpful documentation. You want to help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors, minimalist design, flexibility, and efficiency of use. You want people to be able to rely on recognition rather than recall. So you want people to be able, you want to help people figure out where they need to be rather than for people having to memorize a website and where things actually are. And then also we want consistency. Generally, all of these things are based on conventions that are established through research. And there are 5 conventions that I want to talk about briefly. One is that the search is always on the top right. And let me say, it's usually on the top right. So up over here, we can see on the marketplace site, that's where the search is. If you go to most websites, 90% of the websites, it's going to have the search bar over here. So that's just a good convention for us to pay attention to. We want to have clean navigation. 88% of sites in 2018 had a horizontal navigation bar across the top of the page. And they have found that the fewer the options are in a navigation bar, the better. People are much more confident about their clicks when there are fewer options on the navigation bar. So up here, we can see that there are 5 options on this nav bar for people to click on. I want to talk briefly about the 3 clicks myth. I know you've heard it, that people will give up on a site if they don't get the information they need within 3 clicks, right? They're going to leave. And that's not true. People will actually click infinitely as long as they are confident clicks. As long as people feel good about the clicks that they are making, they will stay on your site. At 2 unconfident clicks, people will start questioning if they're in the right place. And after 3 unconfident clicks, people will begin to start bailing. After 5 unconfident clicks, almost everyone has left a site or an app or wherever they are, okay? So information doesn't need to be just 3 clicks away. That makes makes the information architecture of a site really complicated. So it can be thinner, but you need to make sure that people feel confident about where they are going. Loading speed of a site. Loading speed is not as big a deal as it once was, but 40% of people still abandon pages that take more than 3 seconds to load. And some of it's based on user speeds and presets, but think about what you can do to minimize loading speed. And that often has to do with the fidelity of images that are on a website. Minimize text. Home pages and landing pages need to explain what your product is and why someone should stay there in just a few words. So we go back to Marketplace. There's just a few words on this page. There's just not a lot of text. This is this is above the fold. This is one scroll down. There's still not just a whole lot of text on that page, but it does a pretty good job of explaining about what each click is going to take you to. The logo should be on every page, and it's always at the top, usually at the left. And if you click on it, it should always be a pathway to take you back home. Now, Marketplace, here's Marketplace over here in the top left. So that looks pretty good. And then over here, once we go to other pages in there, it's now in the center, which is a little odd, but okay. And so here's skip lagged again. And sorry, I keep hitting my computer and I bounce. It does a pretty good job of having the logo over here, one nav bar, it's not bad, minimal text. But here's another website, like this is a website which doesn't really have a logo. It has sort of a word mark, lots of text, a really big nav bar. So there's just a lot going on. The search is more in the middle, but that's actually okay. It's one of the conventions of hotels and flights is that their search is more in the middle. So it's okay. But so to recap, usability is the ability of real users to complete a task. Okay. One way to do that is through user tests that includes Think Aloud protocol. Another way is through expert evaluation using heuristics. And hopefully the reason you do all of this is to increase conversions and sales. So that is what I have. But I know that y'all have questions because each of y'all talked about things that were slightly different than what this topic that I talked about actually was. So let's hear them.
Great presentation. Cancel your spotlight. All right, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, or you can go through the chat if you're more comfortable with that. Let's see.
Hey, this is Jen. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Thanks, Erin. Your presentation was really great. There's a lot of good information in there. There's a lot of information in there, and some of it would like to kind of digest to process. Are the slides available to walk through? So there were certain like acronyms and stuff that I didn't know what they were, or they were there and I missed them, kind of thing. Is that available to view?
Like right now, is that what you mean? Or do you want them?
At any point, like
Sure.
fMRI, for example, I don't know what that means.
Oh, sorry, that's just the type of, sorry,
Yeah.
fMRI is a type of MRI. It's just called there's different types of MRIs. One of them is a functional MRI. So that's sorry.
Oh, okay, but there were other things, like there was just so much information, I didn't get it all.
Okay,
I guess
sure.
is what I'm getting at. Like, is there a way to access like your great presentation at some point, either during the call or after the call?
Sure, I will give it to Mari.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll include it in a resource guide type thing.
Okay. And then I had I don't think I fully understood the heuristic evaluation tool piece. I didn't quite understand. I heard you say a tool that you use for that DuckDuckGo, but I'm trying to make in my mind connections about what was the message there.
So yes, let me try to pull up some things that are maybe a little bit easier to understand. My computer had issues this morning and deleted all of the files I had embedded in here. So here, let's see if I can share this and maybe this will make it a little bit easier if still open? I must look quite funny right now.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, it's like, open. Okay, this is not a very good one, but I'm gonna share this one anyway. Okay. All right. So here's a heuristic. And if you go to any website, any browser that you want, like that's all I'm saying is that you can go Google it, or just search, and you're going to find a whole bunch of these things that are called heuristic evaluation system checklists. And this one you can go through and say, the big concept is the visibility of the system status, and that the system should always keep the users informed about what's going on through appropriate feedback within reasonable time. And so here is your actual like step-by-step thing to pay attention to. Does every display begin with a title or header that describes screen contents? Okay. Is a single selected icon clearly visible when surrounded by unselected icons? Is there some form of system feedback for every operator action? So this is like one that was made specifically for a particular site, but you can decide which of these are most important for you. You know, if the pop-up windows are used to display error messages, do they allow the user to see the field in error, right? This is not one of my favorite heuristics, but gives you an idea of what some of them look like, okay? And that then you can go on to this other big picture of match between the system and the real world. Does that help?
I think it helps. I think I am looking for like a couple steps back. Like I think I misunderstood like the intended value or something of the heuristic tool, evaluation tool. Like what are the insights expected from that tool, or I'm just not exactly understanding it. I also don't want to take over like the full meeting on that. So I don't want to just, if
Sure.
other people have questions, but I think, and maybe it's just something for me to research on my own, or it's probably in your slide. I just kind of missed the concept like of a heuristic evaluation versus like a specific tool.
So the basic idea at its very core is that it's a checklist that you can look at and say, does my website do this? If it does, good. If it doesn't, okay, that might be something I need to pay attention to. So, but there's different flavors of these checklists that you can pull from. Sometimes there are, like there's an e-commerce checklist that might be helpful if you're doing an e-commerce site. There are some out there that are specifically tailored to nonprofits who are trying to get donations. So there's all kinds of different ones. I don't want you to think that there's just one massive list that is good. There's a whole bunch of them out there. But the idea there is that you can look at your website or your app or whatever it is that you're looking at, and that somebody else has looked at what would be considered a positive aspect of a site.
Okay.
And weren't you saying as well that the heuristic tool should be used, I mean, it can be used in general, but you should always try to do the, what was it? The Think Aloud protocol with the in-person. So it kind of gives you that same or similar feedback, right? So it's like you have those two options.
Yes. Ideally, you would love to talk to real people, but sometimes that's just not possible. I know that I train a lot of technical writers, and they need to do testing of their sites, and they are not given a budget, or they are not given any tools to be able to actually go and talk to people to see if their content or their social media campaign would make sense. So they have to then figure out how to make sense of what they are doing. Does it meet usability standards? And I can't test users, right? So how do you do that? Heuristic evaluation is a way that you can get around that.
Okay, yeah. And then for Ekta, she asked any good examples of heuristic tools. And with that, what would be, I guess, what would you type into the search engine, whether it's DuckDuckGo or Google or Bing, if anyone still uses Bing?
I would say your two things that you want to look for are either heuristic evaluation or expert review. Those, they are kind of used interchangeably. And if you want to get really, snarky and erudite about it. There's supposed to be differences, but I don't think there really are.
So would you do heuristic evaluation for, and then your field, like nonprofit or blank blank, or campaigns?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly what you would do.
Okay, awesome. I'll remember that.
Yeah. Or sometimes when more popular media takes over, it might be called convention checklists or website checklists or app checklists, or just these checklists are pulling from these heuristic conventions.
Okay, awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? I have one for you. So on the website design platforms, I guess this is a double question. How do you know, like, for example, I used to use Wix.com and it was hard to use. I did not like it. But at the time, like, I didn't know other options really, right? So I guess, first of all, how do you know when you're building your own website, whether or not that's even a good platform to use? And then other side of the question, do you recommend any website design platforms? Like I currently use Squarespace. Is that, how does that rank, I guess?
So the usability of the site is just tricky, right? Like using Wix is hard, and using WordPress until you've actually gotten in there and understand how it works, it can be hard. I think that a lot of those are dependent upon the theme that you end up picking and choosing. I know that there are some WordPress themes that are better than others in terms of information architecture and hierarchical placement of context. So, if you, I don't know which one's best. I just don't know which one's better. I know, I don't teach web design. I got that is one area that I don't teach web design anymore. I used to teach web design. I don't anymore. I know that, though, from my students, that they don't like Wix, and they don't like WordPress, but they seem to like Squarespace and something else that I don't remember right now. Oh, they hate Google Sites, or whatever that is. But that's silly.
Yeah, and maybe the thinking of, if you are building a website or managing a website, if the platform itself is hard to use, then maybe your product won't be that usable if building it is so difficult, because of how the website platform is designed.
Right, and a lot of it has to do with how CMS is, function in with the theme and everything that you have going on. So,
Yeah, definitely. Lacey says, I don't love WordPress, but I feel stuck with it now that my portfolio has all been uploaded to it. Yeah.
Was that Dr. Lamb?
Does anyone else have any questions? Like I said, you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and chime in.
So this is Jen. I have other questions, but I want to make sure everyone has time to ask theirs.
You're all good.
Okay. So Dr. Erin, I'm just trying to, I don't have, like I mentioned, a GUI. Like, my product is like XML or batch, or one aspect of it, I guess, does have a GUI, but that's not necessarily something that we're as focused on expanding at this time. And so a lot of right now I'm in a beta trial with user testing, and just trying to really get away from this idea of user interface and more usability testing, because for my solution or my team solution, it's really more about understanding the voice of the customer, what their problem is. And that's the piece around usability testing that I'm more interested in, like not so much like this button or this whatever visual thing, but more what usability testing in the sense of identifying problems that customers have such that we can prioritize those to start working on solutions. Is that something that maybe you could advise, like any insights on ways to leverage usability testing for identifying customer problems?
So there's a couple of things there that I think I'm hearing. One is that if you are in initial build, then one thing that you can do is to do what's called initial user assessment or audience analysis to find out who are the people that will be using this and what do they need. And another thing that you can find is what tool are people using now and what observations can you make about what is strong, weak, what kind of problems do they run into now. And one of the ways to go through that is through a design thinking protocol, which is a whole, like that's a whole process that you probably don't want to get into. But if at the very least talking to people at any stage, an initial assessment of users can help you figure out what you need to be doing. This is an old thing, but back in the 1980s, IBM was doing a whole bunch of financial software, and they were creating software that had everything that could possibly function in it. And then when they went to look at what people were actually needing, people needed about 20 of the thousands of things that they were putting in there. So IBM pulled back and said, okay, instead of putting the thousands of things in there, we're going to have the 20 things and then make people be able to get to the thousands of things, but they're not all going to be equally weighted. So I know that's not exactly what you're getting at, but they had to go talk to people before they could figure out what the important thing was. And I think for almost anything, we have to talk to people to figure out what is the priority.
Would that include monitoring like where people click and how much? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
If you have access to that, that is great to know. To be able to do click assessments. There are now third-party tools that you can put into a website to see where that trace where people that basically record people's interactions with the website. Now, it's not recording people, but it's recording their mouse tracks. It's recording their where they're clicking through. It doesn't include like other tabs or anything, but when you go to a website, you're probably having your mouse tracking recorded, which is a whole nother privacy issue. But yes, there's you can definitely use analytics to help you make decisions.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe that's a good place to start, is to look at the cold, hard analytics, see where people are going to get the help that they need, and then discussing with the people. I mean, I don't think this is, Jen, this might not pertain to what you're talking about, but in terms of, so we've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, right? So I've really learned how to use Zoom. And with that, I've been going to customer support a lot. And I've found that to be really tricky to navigate. And I'm not sure if your company has it set up like this. And I think Zoom did it like this because they've been inundated with questions. But basically, they'll have, what is your problem? And then a drop-down menu of options. And my problem is never on the drop-down menu of options. So maybe, I don't know if that's something that your website currently has, but as a user, that's something that I hate because I barely have the language to describe my problem in the first place, kind of a thing. But yeah, that, again, I don't know if that's what is on your website, but
yeah, language is a huge problem.
Yeah. What would you say is a efficient way to structure your customer support page, really? Like, obviously that drop down menu that I mentioned is kind of a, not so great way, but I guess also you don't want to just have open fields for people to write paragraphs of what their problem is, because you have to be able to sort it. So is there like a happy medium that you know of?
So support is a whole, like documentation and support is a whole another thing that I barely touch into. I know that good documentation is really hard, and that there's been some work, if I remember correctly, on whether it should be product or process focused, depending on what your site does, and that some people really believe that people can relate to process language, and that this is what I need to do on the site, so I talk about it in terms of the process that I am going through, while other people talk about it in terms of product and product features. I tend to prefer process discussions because I feel like we are humans that are doing things, rather than the static thing and what its features are. But unfortunately, a lot of times we'll see things framed. We'll see sites framed in terms of the product features, and often we'll rely on one nomenclature, right? That for some, like I do one of the things I use research for, they call everything a node, right? Now, and they use node in a very different way than other sites do. But instead of calling it a code, they're calling it a node, and they call things very different. And if there was some way to say, to tell their users this is the same sort of thing, that can help people out. But it's just that type of thing is very difficult to do and do well.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe also language, as you said, is a big takeaway as well for usability and user experience. Yeah, making sure people understand what you're saying. You know, it's great if your website's easy to navigate, but if people don't understand the words,
it's
hard.
Kind of
stuck. Yeah,
exactly.
Definitely. Does anyone else have any questions? Yep. Would you advise a website overhaul all at once, or is it page by page, or is page by page okay?
So it depends on, I think, what you have learned from either your heuristic evaluation or your usability testing, because if people are overall concerned about the navigation of the site and the information architecture, you're going to have to do some architecture changes. Now, that doesn't, you can usually make some architecture changes fairly easily, but a page by page is totally fine, especially for if you're trying to get the low-hanging fruit and you're going to keep making low-hanging fruit changes until you have the ability to, or the resources or the funding to be able to actually do a full overhaul of a site. Do that page by page change.
Yeah, that's helpful as well, because it can be very overwhelming. Definitely. Yep. All right. Well, does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah. Hey, this is Jen. I'm going to try to reframe kind of the same set of questions I've been asking around this idea of learning more about the customer and their problems. Because I think what I'm finding over my years of experience in this is that sometimes people think they want something, but they're not always great at deciding what they actually want. So just trying to really figure out what it is that their actual problem is. And then the people that can figure out the solution can do that, because we're not asking our customers to come up with the solution. We want them to tell us their problems. So if we're starting from scratch, like let's say we don't have, like I said, all my stuff is back end. So forgetting about that for a second, even if it was building a website and you have nothing, like you're starting today, you have nothing, and you want to build something, and you want to start first by not saying, oh, I think this might be a good idea, let me come up with a prototype and then do a test. But instead, I want to first learn about my customers' problems before I build any even prototype. Is usability testing a good fit for that? Like to understand your customers before you even have anything built, to show them anything, just to almost in a waterfall approach, like identify that audience, what their problems are, and then from that start to build prototypes to come back around again with sort of like a phase 2 of usability testing? I'm just trying to, like, in my mind, understand conceptually this a bit better.
Sure. So usability testing is hopefully inherently iterative and that it's not a one-off. Sometimes we will see it as a one-off, but the word testing inherently also means that there is something to test. So if there is nothing to test, then you're not going to do usability testing. But that doesn't mean you can't use usability theory, right? So that at the cornerstone of usability theory is that you want to know what needs to be done. And the people that know what need to be done generally are the users, even if they don't know how to say it, even if they don't know what the main priority is, you can still mine your users to find out what their issues are or what they would want. And some of the things that you could do might be doing interviews is a great way to do it. I used to work for the Postal Service, and one of the things I did with the Postal Service was to help them create documentation. And one of the things I would do would be to talk to people in all kinds of different fields and just find out, what do you need this really big book to be able to do? And I would also go to their workspaces and see what kind of notes did they write to themselves that were cheat sheets, right? I would also asked about 5 of them to keep a diary. And whenever they had a problem with what was currently existing, or they would write a diary entry for me back in the day when we actually used paper and didn't do it digitally. And there's just, even when there's not a thing there, you can describe the thing, and then help people figure out what would be good, bad, or indifferent. You can also, some people wireframe and do some Wizard of Ozing to be able to figure out where would be the best place to begin. But in my classes, I always make my students start before they build anything. They have to go talk to people.
Right. Thanks for that. That makes sense. Yeah, that's what we want to get away from. We're trying to shift culturally from building anything before we understand that voice of customer.
Yes. So yes, before you have anything, I always tell my students, you must go talk to 2 or 3 people and find out if what you're proposing is reasonable. Would this be something that they would incorporate into their lives? Or does this sound as though something that they would ignore? How do you change that? What are the modifications that are needed? But just having a conversation, even not a formal interview, but a conversation with people can really help figure out where priorities are.
Awesome. Does that help answer your question, Jen? Oh, I think she's muted. Well, anyway, we have about 4 minutes left. So if anybody has any further questions, go ahead and ask them. This has been great though. Let's see. Oh, sorry, my sound is on. I don't know why you opened the door.
Hi.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. My partner has a meeting at noon. The headphones and working spaces.
Oh,
Everybody.
okay.
Alrighty. So if there aren't any more questions, let's go ahead and end here before I have any more interruptions. But thank you so much, Erin. This was another great presentation. And thank you everybody for attending, and we'll have this recording up, and Erin, if you'll just send me that presentation, we can also make that available as well.
Yep. All right.
Thank you everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.